The economic techniques of observation. I do not intend to describe these instrumentalities. I am concerned here solely with exhibiting them as an ensemble. The principal instruments which have been developed are statistics, accounting procedures, the application of mathematics to economics, the method of models, and techniques of research into public opinion. It is evident that these elements reciprocally condition one another. At the base, let's see here. At the base of the structure lies statistics, the instrumentality for determining the raw facts of economics. At one time, statistica data were ridiculed on the ground that they were misleading. But this stage lies behind us, and nowadays a large measure of confidence rests in the precision of such data. This change has resulted, in part, from a change in the state of mind of the statisticians themselves. They are immersed in a statistical atmosphere and comply with the quantitative and numerical practices of the modern world. To statisticians, statistics is no longer a mere game. It is an essential operation of society. This represents a change not only in perspective and in seriousness, but also in basic position. For a long time, statistics was the work of amateurs. Today, it is a complex organization of specialists. It has become a profession, and as a consequence, is practiced much more earnestly. Moreover, the statisticians have at their disposal increasingly precise instruments. Among these instruments, which I have transformed administrative as well as statistical technique, are the calculating machine, the punch card machine, and microfilm. Not only has the speed of operation been prodigiously accelerated, but also its precision and its dimensions. By means of microfilm, hitherto uncombinable elements can be combined, and by means of the electronic brain, operations can be effected which the human brain could never perform. The statistician is, materially speaking, in a position to perform convincingly. This is even more evident in the utilization of statistical data, as we shall see. The combination of elements is essential, and this combination becomes feasible largely through intermediacy of the machine. A final element increases the professional seriousness of the statisticians, their responsibility. In democratic countries, it lies in the realm of private enterprise. The various organs concerned with statistical data, in effect, sell their studies to the great corporations, which must know precisely, for example, the course of a market. If the information proves inexact, the statistician can be sued in civil court, at least in the United States. In countries under authoritarian rule, responsibility is a public matter. In the Soviet Union, the statistician who gives false information is regarded as a saboteur. These elements together make modern statistical data more and more precise. The great scope of statistical operations and of organs involved generally escapes the non-specialist. To give a single example, there are in the United States 56 federal agencies, each of which specializes in one or several statistical categories. Altogether, 12 categories of weekly statistics are published. One of these, the category of price, takes in 4 elements. One of these, gross price, comprehends 1,690 weekly quotations combined in 890 series. This indicates the extreme complexity of the operation. It must become even more complex when interpretation is undertaken. All this work is not motivated by pure scientific interest. It is orientated toward action. Permanent inquiry of this sort is no longer instituted to construct or support doctrines, but rather to relate information to action. In order to succeed in effecting this connection, interpretation is necessary, and this is the principal task of the technical discipline called econometrics. Econometrics is distinct from mathematics, or from mathematical economics. It is much more theoretical. Its principal operations on statistical data are twofold. 1. Analysis, comprising operations such as simplification or disassociation of statistical data. And 2. Comparison, which can be applied to different kinds of elements. Magnitudes can be compared by establishing what are called equations of regression, which express a constant relation between two magnitudes of the economic domain.
Hey, Mars.
Yeah.
Are you there?
Yeah.
Alright, are you reading by yourself or what's going on?
Yes.
Alright. You can continue if you want.
Variations can also be compared. Here a correlation index is established, according to which two economic phenomena vary in direct or in inverse proportion, but with the same velocity. Within the same realm, the econometrician tries to establish certain relations. No fact in the economic domain can be regarded as due to chance, and not satisfied with simply noting and giving the correlation formula. The econometrician goes further and establishes the causal relation between two phenomena, a procedure which leads into the future. Until recently, economists operated on concrete data alone, but for the purpose of action, they must make predictions. A distinction must be drawn between predictions, which are made according to the system of covariations, and casual explanations of phenomena. Here the economist leaves the purely technical realm. An equation no longer provides the solution. There is a certain subjectivity, a certain personal judgment. To be sure, it is present in the various other operations, but to a lesser degree. Economic technique has taken over a variety of other means. For example, stochastics, the application of the calculus of probabilities to economic phenomena. This technique is extraordinarily difficult to handle. It does not operate on raw figures, but on statistical data, on data furnished by econometrics, as for example the coefficients of elasticity, and on the data furnished by public opinion research institutes. In connection with the third element, it is evident that economic phenomena are not mechanical. Opinion plays a role. In a very simplified way, it might be said that stochastics seeks to establish a law of probability or of the frequency of a given event, starting with a very large number of observations. Stochastics, therefore, represents an instrument of prediction which gives the direction of the most probable evolution of the situation. This stochastic calculus is limited only by the nature of the economic and social milieu. For example, if a given law is exact, the public which is informed of it tends to react in the reverse sense. But sometimes it reacts by conforming to the law. The act of prediction is thus, in a sense, self-falsifying. But the public, by so reacting, falls under the influence of a new prediction, which is completely determinable. The economist is able to establish laws of probability for all deviations of opinion. It must be assumed, however, that one remains in the framework of rational behavior. The system works all the better when it deals with men who are better integrated into the mass, men whose consciousness is partially paralyzed, who lend themselves willingly to statistical observation and systemization. The results obtained by this technique are impressive, even though the technique is still immature. Much more classical and of a different order is the whole complex of accounting techniques. These techniques have been much modified and no longer belong merely to the realm of the enterprise, but rather to that of economics. The accountant is no longer a mere agent for registering the movement of funds in an enterprise. According to the Lutfalla report published by the Council Economic in 1948, he has become a veritable profits engineer. His operations encompass not only money, but all the elements of production. He is orientated toward the past and also toward the future. The more complex manufacturing operations become, the more necessary it is to take adequate precautions and to use foresight. It is not possible to launch modern industrial processes lightly. They involve too much capital, labor, and social and political modifications. Detailed forecasting is necessary. We shall meet this question again when we discuss planning, but it is appropriate here to call attention to the so-called input-output techniques. Leontiev has pointed out. These represent a method designed to establish in a precise numerical way the interconnections among all sectors of production techniques. They determine for each sector what is bought from and sold to the others. This method makes it possible to establish in detail what raw materials, instruments, tools, and machines are required to produce a given product. Under present conditions, one can no longer fix magnitudes approximately or be content with mastering certain key subjects. For even a very ordinary commodity, 200 or 300 basic elements must be taken into account. Exact quantities, weights, and times must be fixed. The necessary calculations can only be performed with the help of computing machines. With this method, the well-known and hackneyed formula that everything is reciprocally dependent becomes a rigorous reality. But it is the technical elements which are reciprocally dependent, welded together by a common necessity and expressed in certain new techniques. What holds for the private accountant is even more true for the public accountant who works on a nationwide scale. There are certain differences between the two insofar as enterprise has private profit as its end. As a consequence of the profit motive, the private accountant must comply with the rules of capitalist management. The public accountant, who becomes an accountant of initiative, draws up balance sheets and future revenue potentials for a complex organism whose reactions are slow and of great amplitude when referred to the impulses at their origin. If public enterprise behaves in any way like capitalist enterprise, its internal dynamism complies with certain laws. The role of the accountant is to discover these laws. The effects of this new revenue calculating economic technique, which relates economic effects to their causes, are easily seen in fields such as the liquor industry, housing, transportation, and so on. It is clear that this calculated revenue potential bears not merely on money, but also on human capital. France does not yet have a central accounting service which can completely exploit this technique and establish a measurement of social needs means of production, movement of capital, national income, and demographic change. Returning to the methods of pure economic technique, we find the methods of models. It is extremely difficult to experiment in economic matters, but experimentation is indispensable in all sciences, and even more so in techniques. As Vincent puts it, a model is a simplified but complete representation in its numerical aspect of the economic evolution of a society, for example, a nation during a given period. A model is a reproduction in a miniature of a certain economic ensemble in the form of mathematical equations. It is impossible, obviously, to put all economic phenomena into a model. A certain arbitrariness is called for. The primary act is therefore a choice, founded on some theoretical decision, of the constants and variables to be put into the model. This theoretical decision, however, is not arbitrary. It is guided by certain principles, in particular the necessity of linking observation to action. Once the constants and the variables of the system have been selected, and they may be numerous, the relations between them are established. Some of these relations are evident in the sense that they are purely quantitative. Others are more unstable and subjective and must be established by the economic technician himself. They are empirical relations, verified or proven false by experiment. Finally, the ensemble of these relations must be put in the form of equations by insertion of the time factor. Then, by solving the equations, it is possible to study the evolution of the system and its incidences. What's an incidence? Incidence. Occurrence, rate, or frequency of a disease or crime, something undesirable. This facilitates the study of the evolution of certain mechanisms determined by a social group, or of the incidence of some exterior intervention into an economic system, or of the influence and importance to the whole of every element in an ensemble. Models can be purely theoretical or historical, as when the data arise from statistics, in which case they must be tested against the actual evolution of society. Or they can be predictive, as when the attempt is made to forecast the future. These predictive models are the object of great interest in the study of economic complexes. The last of these new economic techniques which I wish to describe in this brief review is public opinion analysis. Everyone is acquainted with the Gallup Institute, which has branches in almost every country of the world. Various systems, soundings, samplings, inquiries, are used to establish periodically the feelings of a given class or category of the population about any important question. Certainly, that must be the Gallup polls, right? Certainly, there is strong skepticism about these methods. No one believes.
Hey, what are you reading and why?
I'm reading The Technological Society by Jacques Ellul because I like to read. What?
Okay, I was just curious.
Certainly there is strong skepticism about these methods. No one believes that he thinks and acts like his neighbor. No one is sympathetic to the notion that he is a mere number in some list or series, and this unconscious rejection makes for skepticism. Nonetheless, The results of such samplings must be deemed valid, in spite of the seeming, but easily explainable, setbacks they suffer. As for example, in the well-known case of the American presidential elections of 1948, the results reflect various phenomena. Sociological currents, ethical preferences, and political opinions with which we here are not concerned. But other results reflect economic currents, opinions concerning prices and wages, commercial choices, urgent economic needs to the extent that they are measurable, and so on. In sum, anything in the nature of an opinion which can be grasped by a good observer or reporter will henceforth be numerically measured and followed scientifically during all stages of its development. This method represents a great revolution. It permits the integration of opinion in the technical world in general and in economic techniques in particular. This system brings into the statistical realm measures of things hitherto unmeasurable. It effects a separation of what is measurable from what is not. Whatever cannot be expressed numerically is to be eliminated from the ensemble, neither because it eludes numeration or because it is quantitatively negligible. Either whatever cannot be expressed numerically is to be eliminated from the ensemble, either because it eludes numeration or because it is quantitatively negligible. So if we can't quantify it, then it doesn't exist.
I think I buy that as a philosophical naturalist.
Mm-hmm. But obviously there are things that exist that can't be quantified. We have...
Like what?
Like love. We have...
Oh man, it's funny. It's funny you said love. I was thinking love too. Yeah, I don't know if love is a thing that exists. Interesting.
We have, therefore, a procedure for the elimination of aberrant opinions, which is essential to the understanding of the development of this technique. The elimination does not originate in the technique itself, but the investigators who utilize its results are led to it of necessity. No activity can embrace the whole complexity of a reality except as a given method permits. For this reason, this elimination procedure is found whenever the results of opinion probing are employed in political economy. The economist is thus provided with an arsenal of technical means which enable him to observe and sometimes to predict economic reality in detail. Then the following question is unavoidable. Will these techniques remain simple techniques of observation, of pure knowledge? We grant that their creators had no ulterior motives. The means are there simply to be of assistance to economic science. But will this motive be adhered to? Let us consider the position of the economist as J.U. Neff has described it. The economist, more or less stricken with an inferiority complex in regard to the public, abandoning the hope of effecting policy by objective thinking, seeks refuge by becoming an expert and counselor on questions of technology or practical politics. Economists cherish the hope of influencing reality. The technique of knowledge the economist is now acquiring allows him, through the state, to exercise this influence. We note this in all countries, no matter what their type of economy or form of government. It has been called the reign of the experts, but it is in actual fact the reign of the technicians. Economists today have the means of being technicians near the seat of state power. But even without wishing to take account of this tendency, we know that these means of observation of reality will not remain inert. Like all techniques, they possess specific weights and direction. The reasons are very simple. An organization for establishing statistical data is extremely costly and cannot continue without profits. One way of making a profit is to sell statistical products to a capitalist clientele, which will utilize them to guide its business into certain channels. A statistical bureau a statistical bureau then becomes a counseling bureau. But the use of statistical data in a semi-liberal capitalist economy is restricted and cannot be developed to its full effectiveness. This incapacity of capitalism correctly to employ techniques appears time and again. Mumford says, one of the most flagrant faults of capitalism is not to have known how to make use of existing laboratories, for example, the Bureau of Standards, to determine norms from which the whole body of consumers would have benefited. The tendency of technological society is to determine the movements of the macroeconomy, yet it is striking to note that statistics, once established, tend to revert to the level of the microeconomy and individual decision, and to find employment only on this level. This is obviously insufficient. The economists are in a position to lay claim to something better than a clientele which, in any case, seldom enables them to cover their costs. They must address themselves to the state. Certain semi-public corporations finance the operations, but it is clear that the state demands its quid pro quo. If the state is to pay for the statistical research, it must get something in return.
Quid pro quo.
What does that mean? Quid pro quo?
Quid pro quo is sort of tit for tat.
Oh. But if the state is to pay for statistical research, it must get something in return: assistance in directing national affairs. The state requires the economists, on the basis of statistics, to seek out methods of intervention either directly or by subtle means such as those advocated by John Maynard Keynes. When the great private corporations or the state ask the economists for a method to influence reality, they are addressing the economist's own invincible longing, which, in the beginning, engendered the improvement of these scientific means. Suppose we have accumulated enormous quantities of facts, have encompassed the whole of reality, and possess the means to follow the mechanism of economic phenomena, and even to a certain degree to predict them. Shall this accumulated force, then, serve no purpose? The 1952 report of the American Bureau of Labor Statistics shows clearly that this ensemble of means leads inevitably to planning. We confess that we are unable to follow Clausen's reasoning when he declares that the operations of the compatible nationale are not a threat to freedom because, in fact, they are not applied. Once the trends of the economy have been recognized and reduced to numerical form, will it be tolerated that no intervention be undertaken when the catastrophic consequences of some decision or other have been clearly perceived? On a more modest but still significant plane, what meaning has a detailed accounting of all the needs of a thoughtless worker, including the number of springs in his mattress and the number of razor blades he uses annually, undertaken in order to establish a minimum wage if he can spend his money haphazardly? What is the significance? What meaning has the detailed accounting of all needs of a thoughtless worker?
Why is the word characterized as thoughtless? That seems dismissive.
I don't know. Mere prediction would plainly be absurd. The irrationality of the individual keeps him from living on the amount he could live on accordance to calculations. He would die of hunger on a subsistence minimum, unless an authoritarian education made him conform.
Well, of course it does, right? And then the modern existence of the credit card makes that so much worse, because it lets people grasp for things they want that they really can't afford, but they do have access to.
Let us grant that this represents no more than a temptation to the economist, but it would require superhuman strength not to yield to this temptation once action becomes possible. The more so because the informational techniques described are closely connected to techniques of action, as are the establishment of norms or of accounting plans. We have
Exactly.
What does that mean?
Well, that's talking about the credit card thing I was just talking about. I can resist buying the thing I can't afford when I literally cannot do it because I have to have the money to do it. But once I can apply for a credit card that I can't afford to pay off, but it lets me actually have access to that thing, resisting that temptation to have the thing when I know I can have it, I just can't afford it, and it'll get repossessed at some point, becomes a real problem.
Let us grant that this represents no more than a temptation to the economist, but it requires superhuman strength not to yield to this temptation once action becomes possible.
Action becomes possible. Resisting the action is not all that difficult when it's not possible. Once it becomes possible, then that temptation really does become overwhelming.
Oh, but he's talking about the temptation of the economist to use his knowledge to kind of like, for like nefarious purposes?
Well, yeah, but psychologically, it's the same sort of mechanism in the brain that results in both things.
Yeah. Mere prediction would be plainly absurd. The irrationality of the individual keeps him from living on the amount he could live on according to calculations. He would die. So if we can, they could calculate how much money you need to live and give you that, you would fucking die because you'd be like not spending it right. Let us grant that this represents no more than a temptation to the economist. But what is he talking about there? He's talking about...
There's nothing I can do if I give you all the money you need to feed yourself for the week and you choose to spend it on an autographed drawing from Victor, right? Like, okay, now you're not eating, but you got the thing you wanted, I guess.
Even people, like a lot of people who win the lottery, they just waste all their money immediately. They're broke again.
A lot of people who win the lottery for millions of dollars, for an amount of money that's 10 times what they ever would have made in their entire life otherwise, a lot of them, when you visit them a decade later, will report that win made them less happy. It's almost 100%. And it turns out, when you look at these statistics, the happiest lotto winners are the ones who win a more modest amount of money, a non-life-changing amount. And you can if you're, let's say you're me, right? You're getting your bills paid, you're getting your house paid off, you have the things you need to be comfortable, and then you win the lottery for a couple $100,000. Oh wow, I can buy that car that I never would have bought because I couldn't have afforded it, or But if I win the lottery for $100 million, I'm going to get divorced. Like, that's just inevitable,
Okay.
And I love my wife, and I don't want to divorce her, so I don't want to win the lottery for $100 million. It would make my life worse. And when you talk to lotto winners, that seems to always be the case. The average person has no idea what to do with $100 million, how to manage it. So right away, all sorts of people show up trying to screw them over. That's going to make life miserable right off the bat. And then inevitably at some point, in a very, you might say, Christian way, that person who wins the lottery for $100 million, once they get over I won this money, they're going to realize, it turns out I pretty much had everything I really needed. I just didn't have a lot of things I wanted. And it turns out a lot of things I wanted weren't necessarily good for me.
Mm-hmm. I think that's why sometimes when we pray for something, God doesn't give it to us, because like he knows what's best for us, and we might be asking for something that is not good for us because we're dumb.
Yeah, if prayer worked like a magic wand, that wouldn't be good for anybody. I mean, I guess it would be good for the person who's a parent of a child with cancer, but it wouldn't be good for most people.
Oh, yes, I'm almost done with it. We have distinguished somewhat arbitrarily. I don't even understand what he's saying in this fucking, like, shit's like complicated.
I'll tell you a secret, man. I don't understand most of the things I read, and I don't think most people do. I think it takes several readings and a lot of time reflecting to wrap your head around someone's idea, especially when they get super wordy about it.
This guy's like way smarter than me too. And this book was written in fucking the late 60s, so I'm not aware of a lot of the, like, what the world was like back then.
Which ironically probably makes you a bit smarter than him.
I don't think so. I think we get dumber as time goes on.
I'm not sure about that. I mean, I can see the argument, like the whole what's that movie? Idiocracy. I kind of get it. I don't think so. Yeah, there's good arguments on both sides of that one.
We have distinguished somewhat arbitrarily between knowledge and action in order to present the most objective way possible the normal development of economics produced by the creation of these techniques. Even when they serve solely for the purpose of knowledge, it is clear by how many routes they end in intervention. Oh, he's saying, like, initially it's just about knowledge, but then it becomes about, like, I guess, control. Econometrics is only to be understood if it issues its normal end, the establishment of economic planning. Without this, econometrics is inefficient, and efficiency is the very law of technique. Like a horse chafing at the bit, the techniques of economic science await the signal to intervene more completely than ever before in the reality they have come to understand. So they study the economics, get the knowledge, and then change the reality. Understand the reality to change the reality. So, like, the person can't resist temptation to, like, purchase the thing he can't afford. The technician can't resist the temptation to, like, use science and technology and knowledge to control people. So anytime there's science and knowledge is acquired, the ultimate end will be to alter reality to whatever the person acquiring the knowledge desires, I suppose. To manipulate reality.
That's probably true to some extent. I think your average pastor in a very secluded, isolated type of evangelical
You're breaking up.
Is definitely going to have the ability change reality to some extent. People are going to believe if he's smart about it, he's not going to say too many things that can be. Oh, damn it! Sorry.
Every time I talk about like science manipulating people, you have to bring up like, oh, religion manipulated people.
Well, I mean, people manipulate people, and the science we know comes from people. The religion we know comes from people. So that's probably not surprising.
Well, in the past, yeah, religion was used to control people, but like today, it's more like technology and science is what's used to control people. So that's
Have you read or heard about that old book? God, it's like from the 50s or something. But how to win friends and influence people, or something along those lines.
Yeah, I've heard about the
And a lot of people will look at that and they'll say, "Oh, that's just a book about how to manipulate people." And as a person who's not especially good in social situations, I'm not too sure about that. I don't know that I'm trying to manipulate people, but I certainly would like to better understand why I seem to have a difficult time connecting with people. And I think the book's really good for that purpose. Like the book advises you should use people's names. Like when I talk to you, I should go, "Hey, P. Mars." People like to hear their own names. And you could say that's a manipulation technique, or you could also say it's a thing I never do because I'm so focused on myself. And maybe if I use people's names more, it'll help me focus on other people, and that'll make me more likable to other people, which is kind of what I'm shooting for. I don't think that's manipulation. I don't know.
well,
I think there exists a certain group of people who they find it very easy to get along with other people in social situations. They're very likable, just naturally kind of likable. And so when they see a book like this telling you how to influence people, they see it as like, oh, manipulation techniques. But I think those people are ignoring that there are other people who are not so comfortable in social situations and do not find it so easy to make friends. And those people are looking for, what am I doing wrong, and how can I do this better? What's the thing this other guy's doing that I'm not doing? I don't think that's manipulation. I don't know, maybe it is. I don't think so.
well, I mean, I think we all manipulate each other. Just having a relationship, you're gonna. I mean, it's manipulative in a sense.
Oh yeah.
But like, I was talking about manipulation as like, I don't know, like control people, basically, like have power over people.
We're also, in a sense, just the billiard balls bouncing around the table after God breaks the rack. And who knows in what ways we're subtly influencing somebody else by the interactions we have. And maybe we need to be aware of that and careful about how we're influencing people. Or maybe we're sociopaths who just don't care and would rather just line our own pockets by getting people to believe any silly nonsense. Thus you get your Joels, etc.
I gotta go to the store. I'll be around later. See you later.
Yeah, good to see you.
Yeah.